We've embarked on a wild adventure. We really have. And nobody knows where all of this is going to lead. And in a sense, nobody's in control. In a sense, the technology is leading us, and we don't know where it's leading us. All that we can sensibly speculate about today is what's going to happen in the next 10 or 15 years. But for goodness sake, where on earth is it going to be by the time we are old, or by the time our children are old? I've got a 3-year-old daughter, and I think, what's it going to be like when she's my age? And I really believe we've got the capability today to build a much better world for her than people are living in today.
Hello, and welcome to the Game Asylum. In this cesspool of madness I call a video game review show, we have been taking a look at the wonderful, eclectic and spellbinding series of interactive films made by the polarizing personality David Cage. Okay, that previous statement has more underlying salt than the English Channel, and if you've watched this 4-video series so far, you know this has been a head-splitting exploration into the mind of an auteur creator, which has been... Detroit Become Human is a sci-fi themed thriller released in 2018 on the PlayStation 4, and is the 5th game produced by Quantic Dream. And as you may already be aware, the last 2 games I took a look at in this series were, without hyperbole, the worst games I've ever played. Yet, like a moth to a flame, I find myself fascinated by Quantic Dream's work. And while this series was born to riff on the silliness of these games, and the lead creator's stunning incompetence, David Cage and his team do come up with a few great ideas that could be interesting concepts if done right. Yes, if you've been following me on this journey, you probably already have a good idea how this following video will play out. But stick around, because this one took me to places I never thought I would go when reviewing an interactive whatever the fuck these games are. Made by a creative with the self-awareness of a breeze block with Uwe Boll's face sellotape to it. Also, thanks for sticking around, it's been quite the ride. So let's start off this very long video with the bottom line. Yes, I know I am stealing this from Tim Rogers of Action Button.
Hello.
Detroit Become Human is the best David Cage game David Cage has ever made. Which sounds like a ringing endorsement, and it is and it's not at the same time. You could say it's complicated. While I enjoyed most of what this game had to offer, and in some areas it's damn right inspired, it's still full of the dumb bollocks that you would expect from our favourite auteur. And yes, I'm using the word favourite in 18-foot high sarcasm quotes. Yet I can honestly say that Detroit is the most consistent game in terms of tone made by Quantic Dream. But once again, that is a loaded statement, because this consistency is a nice tender hot dog in a bear trap. And while you want to grab it and taste its meaty goodness, you might lose your hand in the process. And I know I'm using a food analogy in a game review, very hack, get over it. Detroit Become Human takes place in 2038, where mankind has evolved to rely on androids to assist them in their everyday lives. In this alternative version of the Motor City, this uprising of robotic servants, created by the megacorp Cyberlife, cause various social political issues that are so trite in their metaphorical context, they might as well be a Watch Mojo video. And yes, additionally, in this universe you can have sex with a robot, just so you know. We wouldn't want to ignore the gross horniness of our writer, would we? He's probably rubbing one out right now, and that's a mental picture I just put in my head that I'm not proud of. Ugh. In this story, we follow 3 of these said androids, such as the rogue android hunter Connor, who is a prototype synthetic under the supervision of Lieutenant Hank Anderson, who, if you haven't guessed already, is a hard-boiled drunkard detective, who is of course borderline suicidal. I would say drink a shot because it's DC using another cliche and suicide to pad out his story rather than using the original idea, but it's a little inappropriate this time. The next character is a domestic servant called Kara, who's in charge of caring for a girl called Alice. The kicker here is that Kara has just come back from the repair shop as her owner, Todd, brutally beat her to death. So yeah, themes of domestic abuse. I guess David is typing with one hand again. Also, I love that they use the same skin for Todd that they used in Beyond Two Souls, in the scene where Jodie gets sexually assaulted. Stay classy, Quantic Dream, stay classy. And the third wheel we have Marcus, another Domestobot, looking after famous painter Carl Manfred, played by Lance Henriksen. And in all honesty, they have quite the wholesome relationship, where Carl tries to stir up emotions in Mark by painting pictures and discussing philosophy, which as you can guess in this world is very, very bad. However, I do find it amusing that DC has finally admitted defeat in trying to insert emotion into mindless, soulless humans, and now is trying to crowbar emotions into actual robots. But making a joke about it is such low-hanging fruit, it's below sea level. And I will say that the opening with Connor, where you have to investigate what is going on and then save the girl, is one of the strongest in the Cageography. While the structure of this storytelling is in the same style as Heavy Rain, where we flip from one character to another as they progress through their own story, unlike the former, Detroit's scene-to-scene flow is tolerable. This smoothness is mostly attributed to David Cage not being the only writer this time. After being moved by the, quote, gripping story of Beyond Two Souls, it inspired UK TV writer Adam Williams to reach out to Cage to help write his future stories. The problem I had during my research is that there seems to be some confusion on what he actually did on this project, and his role in this said project. In interviews, he is billed as the lead writer. However, on the wiki, he is a supplementary writer, and then in the credits of the game, he is credited as a secondary scribbler. So trying to nail down what he actually did and what he worked on before Detroit was a fruitless endeavour, unfortunately. Unless he's a time-travelling Hollywood actor from the 1960s, and yeah, maybe not. I honestly don't think Quantic Dream has the tech to make a time machine. They can barely write a coherent story. While he may be a pain in the ass to Google search, his influence on this story is immediately noticeable. While the overall plot and script is still a very David Cage affair, the cringe and offbeat delivery that taints his previous work is greatly reduced. Remember the Kojima filter from the last video? This is what I'm talking about. Well, the filter in question is more like a wet piece of toilet paper, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. A great vertical slice of this improvement is the relationship between Carl and Marcus. Yes, the prose being spoken is still flowery. You can't wash out all those stains, but you can tell that these characters had a relationship before the events of this game. It has a lived-in feel that most stories never attempt to grasp, let alone intentionally try to get you, the player, to notice. Contrast this with the relationship between Jodie and the mannequin of William Dafoe in Beyond Two Shits. They try everything they can to make you buy into this relationship between the two, but ultimately it just ends up being a boring sigh when Dafoe finally dies. This is mostly due to DC employing Hollywood caliber actors, but instead of giving them decent fucking stuff to work on, he just coasted on this as a unique selling point. It's like trying to employ a porn actor and not asking them to do, you know what I mean. So when I was introduced to these characters, and Hank and Connor I have to add, I fell for their charming demeanours, and I was pleasantly surprised. It was actually a lot of fun to be around these characters. What is this? Am I connecting to characters in a David Cage game? Damn, I guess I am the Tin Man trying to find my heart. Do you get it? It's an Alice in Wonderland reference. And yes, this is a joke about DC's lack of subtlety. And yes, he drops this nugget that you're seeing here, which is so on the nose, my future unborn children will need rhinoplasty. We're off to see the wizard of really shit stories. Oh, I can't be arsed with this joke. Let's move on.
Cringe. There's no other word for it. This makes me cringe. It's embarrassing.
Even with this smooth flow to this story, in comparison to Quantic's previous output, I still can't shake off this feeling that there's an air of overcompensation running throughout this story. Instead of making a tight, compacted narrative full of large and small moments, this triad of characters is shoved into paths that are structurally bloated, and this, quote, hot seat style of bouncing from one avatar to another can cause, especially to me, this immersion whiplash. Not enough to cause me to lose interest, however, yet just enough to make me mildly annoyed while playing. Let me explain. The tension and the intrigue are rising to a boiling point, building that hype for a satisfying release. And then you are rudely kicked out to another character, and that intriguing hook is never addressed. Or, by the time you take control of that character again, the momentum of the previous scene is gone. And that's not even getting into the tangential crossroads when these characters actually meet, which could be described as token at best and utter pointless at its worst. While this multi-character approach to storytelling has been attempted by Cage multiple times, and arguably it's the best it's ever been, it's still a pale comparison to his cinematic influences. This 50-50 structure, where all the characters get their shit in at the same time, does hurt the pace of the overall narrative. Let me give you a visual of how this feels. Now, I would just love to call the overall story arc bad and move on to the next subject, but that would pass on some of the best moments in Detroit that are buried under all this tripe. So, if we're going to experience these moments in a better way, how can we theoretically change the structure of this story to make these small yet memorable moments stick out better? Maybe if we edit this to be an episodic format, then perhaps these little story beats would be easier to digest. The problem here is that without any programming know-how and not knowing how to call your engine with a rasterizer or whatever the shit that means, how can we test this theory? Especially if I can't reverse engineer the code like a cool cyberpunk hacker, or some twat with reflective shades on, whatever. When I was thinking how we can test this theory out, I thought perhaps I could use my scrub level expertise in video editing to make a rough cut, linear film of each character's story, circumventing the hot swapping, jumping around mess that the original story has. As I already have the clips from all my capture sessions, I can just throw them all together and boom, there you go. However, that sounds like a lot of work, and my videos take forever to make as it is, until it dawned upon me that people have already done this type of cut and posted them on this very website.
Nice.
So I blocked off a day to watch these edited linear cuts that focused on a singular character, and taking into account a handful of continuity errors, I felt like I had a better grasp over what is going on, rather than the mosh pit that Cage likes to structure his stories in. This leads to another question. Why do we have to consume these stories in such a convoluted manner? Why does DC try to do this portmanteau round-robin story structure that only a few creators attempt to begin with? What is his end goal in trying to do this style? Well, it's because David Cage is extra. 2,000-page scripts, needless complexity, and innate celebrity-laden casts is here to pump up the content, in a vain attempt to add production value. This obsession with excess, while not inherently bad, can lead to a minefield of problems, such as plot holes, contradictions, and various other writing fallacies. Yes, the hand of Alan Williams on this project is a much needed filter, and it makes the entertaining moments stand out a lot more than before. And while this emphasis on excess is great on the technical side of the production value, and we will dry hump that stuff later, this notion of legitimacy by blacking out the sun with a landslide of narrative tidbits is a lot to take in, especially if you want to consume Detroit Become Human more than once, because most of this stuff you don't really see on a first playthrough. If you just enjoy it at a surface level, then the story will feel a lot more easier to read. It's just when you play the game multiple times, this isn't the case. And guess what? I've played this game 5 times now. And while this line of questioning is edging closer to rhetorical shitposting, I think it's better to ask a more relevant question. What makes the bloviating in Detroit different from the other games? Well, in my own view, the answer is twofold. One, the general writing has improved, not sure if that is due to the new filter or just by dumb luck, and the second is the use of science fiction to frame these narrative topics. Oh yeah, we're going to talk about some nerd shit that I love, and I'm not sorry. Out of all types of fictional storytelling, sci-fi has the broadest spectrum. It's a perfect what-if sandbox where you can borrow aspects of real life and play them out on a grander, more technologically advanced scale. Star Trek: The Next Generation is a perfect encapsulation of this sandbox in action. Most of the stories are based around the crew, and their own social struggles that happen in each episode. What makes this show addictive to me is the personable nature of these characters. Yes, it's set on a spaceship in the far future where humans have evolved to overcome their petty squabbles, and of course make contact with various other intelligent life forms. It's still grounded in reality. Sure, it's a magical reality where wacky shit happens, but the interactions between all the characters are mostly natural, apart from Riker, who is the biggest sex offender in the galaxy. Another thing I love about TNG is that it isn't scared to show you some grim shit at times, such as the planet full of junkies, or to be more relevant for this video, the one where Data, who is an android, went behind his superiors to create his own android child, which leads to a very dismayed Captain Picard to question what it means to be alive. Like, life is toothpaste that can't be put back into its tube, etc, prime directive, blah blah bollocks. Yet, within 45 minutes of this episode, we are put on a journey of life and death with characters that shouldn't have any emotional weight due to them being essentially computers with legs, to this moral tug of war of what it means to be human, what it means to have sentience regardless of the being. It's easily one of my favourite episodes of a show that is packed full of great moments such as this. Maybe I'll talk about it more one day. Also, on a Star Trek gaming side note, I'm now a proud owner of a copy of Star Trek Legacy, and of course the 2013 movie tie-in where they changed the entire mythos of the franchise and turned it into a third-person shooter. Yikes. With all that said, and getting back on the topic, I find it ironic that Quantic Dream took these ideas and somehow couldn't do them justice, even with 10 times the length. With Cage setting this story in the near future, he is trying to play with that previously mentioned sandbox, while at the same time trying to ground the world in reality that is not too far from our own. So in a way, he has created this wiggle room where he can go a little silly with his concepts. And this is where a majority of my enjoyment for Detroit came from. One scene in particular is where Kara and Alice find this creepy looking mansion in the middle of nowhere, owned by this charming fella. As you can probably guess, instead he tries to wipe Kara's mind and turn her into a twisted abomination, just like the numerous others of her kind imprisoned in this house. And this level is capped off by the creator of these android zombies being beaten to death by his own creations. Now, does this story have anything to do with the overall narrative? No. Will it have lasting effects on the characters involved? No. In fact, nothing in this scene has any bearing on the story apart from this small arc, which should be a big gaping hole in this story, and yes, it is, but I can't help but love it. If you've watched my channel for any length of time, you know I have a soft spot for schlocky horror games from the PS1/PS2 era. So this is my bias talking here, but my imagination ran wild with this idea. I want an entire game based on this. No, I want an entire series where Kara navigates through multiple regal buildings, dodging mutilated sex dolls like a hentai version of Clock Tower mixed with Five Nights at Freddy's. Indie devs, get on that. And that's not even it. So many snippets of interesting ideas that are crammed into this proverbial dish could benefit so much for being allowed to breathe. And that being said, I find it funny that the structure of how the story is told is far more interesting than the story itself. And I would make a dumb segue joke here, but you know what we're about to talk about. To dampen this carpet bombing of exposition, I am just going to cut to the chase and talk about the overarching theme of this story. Then we can go into the more granular stuff later on, because there is a French auteur in the room that wants to say something big, not too big however, just vaguely imply something, and then run away from the backlash, like some troll on Twitter. And as video game enjoyers, this next subject we absolutely adore, and that subject is politics. And I can already picture a Call of Duty commentator cringe in his seat just hearing that word. Yes, my mind hasn't evolved since 2013. Sorry, I'm stalling again. While I couldn't give a flying rope of Bill Clinton's bodily fluid for politics, and this isn't the platform to express your garbage opinions either, DC and his team have decided to move away from the philosophical screed of what happens when you die in Beyond Two Souls, to what happens when your iPhone gets bored of you looking at weeb filth and decides to pick up a brick and fight the establishment. Not sure how your phone would do that, but stay with me on this. In an interview with the gaming website Game Reactor, Adam Williams explains why him, Cage, and Quantic Dream wanted to talk about not a specific social issue, but rather a universal theme of a divided society between humans and androids.
In imagining the story, we wanted to explore universal themes. Themes that repeated themselves throughout societies, and one of those is the relationship between those who have power and those who do not have power. And that's the relationship between humans and androids. Humans and androids.
What?
We didn't have a specific issue in mind, whether it's racism or sexism or whatever it is. We wanted to explore the universal theme of a divided society and let the player bring their own specific context to the story, which is going to help them write their own story to the choices they make.
While I get why they wanted to talk about civil rights without the baggage of the real life context, I can't shake off this feeling that Cage and Williams wanted to co-opt this hot button topic and then strip it of this metaphorical context, to then follow up with this low-bore message of bland platitudes. But then I can see the other hand, where this is a standalone universe steeped in verisimilitude. That what if sandbox we mentioned earlier can be used to run an alternative scenario where the prejudice of the human race is united by its hatred for androids. I will say at least the writing slips you into this gradually rather than making a hard right turn, like in Cage's previous attempts. It's not subtle, but it's enough to make you feel that there's a natural progression. After breaking his programming in a visual way, Marcus gets into a fight with Carl's druggy son, who then gets shot up by the cops and dumped in what can only be described as robot hell. And while in this pit, he has to salvage parts from his fallen brethren in order to climb out of the mire to become a very blatant Jesus allegory. Anyway, while walking through the Valley of the Shadow of Death, he is told by one of his busted buddies to go to Jericho, a bastion for recently self-aware androids, and by the power of his Gary Stewness, Marcus becomes the leader. No, that's a wrong word. He becomes the saviour of this ragtag group, who then hatch a plan to raid various Cyberlife facilities for delicious lug nuts, weapons, and other mechanical comrades that Marcus can convert to their cause, because he's the chosen one in a David Cage script. However, this is where the plot starts to get very interesting. But just like the game and its story structure, let's jump to another character. After his sizzling opening where he has to negotiate with a rogue replicant, Connor is partnered with Lieutenant Hank Anderson, played by Clancy Brown, and their job is to investigate these incidents where androids are going nutty. Basically, it's the Norman Jayden gameplay from Heavy Rain given a cyberpunk coat of paint. And yes, the gameplay here is shallow in terms of working out what happened, but I am a sucker for TV police procedurals and games where you have to use your wits to solve crimes. Yeah, this isn't LA Noire, but I would love to have a full game in this style, with some added complexity. But I will say it's flashy enough to distract you from its lack of depth, like a set of keys being jiggled in front of a baby. And going back to the subject of David Cage being extra, of course there is a ton of ideas, like we mentioned earlier, have been tossed into this dumpster fire. Ideas that, with some time and some effort, could have been really cool concepts on their own. Such as during the investigations with Hank and Connor, there is another intriguing piece of world building. In quite like these areas where you see rogue androids, you'll notice the term RA9 scratched into the walls. You see, RA9 is a kind of godlike figure for these recently sentient androids. And it piqued my interest because, yeah, you would think as soon as they are self-aware, they would also think about their existence post them being alive. And it's always that quandary, what will happen when you die? So logically, you could see that happening. You could see that they're trying to find a higher being to give them some comfort. However, it's another plot line that's tossed into the burning dumpster and is dumped as quickly as it's established because, like I said previously, David Cage is extra. He will throw this at you, but actually give you anything to chew on? No. Anyway, throughout this deep dive, I have been secretly obsessed with the progression of the technology that is used to create these games. Sure, it took a while to hit the balance between photorealism and artistic expression, like I mentioned in the Heavy Rain review. Detroit has a style that I really fuck with, and the motion capture especially is a perfect yardstick of this progression. While full-body motion capture is nothing new in games or movies, the combination of that as well as facial and performance capture at the same time brings a new level of believability that wasn't even possible just a few years ago. This is not just a bunch of chumps parading a bukkake level of balls on their bonds, this is a full-body performance. When I highlighted this problem in Heavy Rain, where we compared the audition footage to the final product, you could see for yourself there was a wild disconnect between the performance from the actor themselves and then the performance in the booth, because the scenes such as this sounded so flat in comparison to their physical performances. So you have this gulf of realistic looking characters acting unnaturally, or sounding unnaturally. Saying that, let's talk about the cast. While Cage had his watershed moment when he got two big names in that game, one I was stoked to see was Jesse Williams, who played Marcus. But he has one of those faces that just bugs the hell out of you because you've seen him before but you don't know where. You know, you do that Leo DiCaprio pointing at a TV meme thing when you see them. And through my multiple playthroughs of Detroit, I had that feeling. I know I've seen him before, but I couldn't place my finger on what. So I finally caved in and checked IMDb, and realised he was in the 2011 horror movie The Cabin in the Woods. Yes, it's a Joss Whedon film, with that annoying cool and witty dialogue that makes me eternally cringe to the point my rectum starts to bleed. With that said, it's one of the best 80s inspired slasher movies starring middle-aged actors playing teenagers I have ever seen. Another standout performance is Brian DeChart, who plays Connor, who seems to be prolific in recent times, with starring roles like Brendan the Vending Machine in Cyberpunk 2077.
Who's that girl you were talking to?
Oh, you mean Theo? She's my bestest friend. Gosh, she's so nice, and pretty, and sensitive. I like talking to her. Definitely way more fun than pumping out caramel lattes.
He also has a Twitch and YouTube channel, and just seems to be an all-round wholesome dude. Also, on a side note, DeChart and Brown's interactions in Detroit Become Human were apparently improvised, so these standout performances that we see throughout the game are down to their chemistry rather than the script. And the third main actor in this cast is Valerie Curry, who plays the role of Kara. What I found interesting is that she has a long history with Quantic Dream, as she starred in a tech demo called Kara in 2011, which is the basis of what we would later see in Detroit. In fact, this is what got me interested in Quantic Dream back in the day. Not enough to play their games, mind you, but I am a self-proclaimed cyberpunk tart, so anything with that look will have my attention. And also, and ironically, this short is the best thing Quantic Dream has ever made. It's short, it's sweet, and it hits you hard, and it's definitely worth checking out if you haven't before. And while I find Curry's performance in Detroit to be captivating, unfortunately they kinda use her as an afterthought rather than a solid third column of the story. Sure, she has some B-movie scenes, as I mentioned earlier, which are great, but in hindsight, it seems that she was casted for token notoriety over her abilities as an actress, and her overall plotline, compared to Robot Jesus and Connor, is the quote cagiest plot of this story. In less words, it says nothing, tries to get you engaged by hefty doses of misery porn, and ultimately is meaningless in the grand arc of the narrative. I would complain, but I am more astounded by the consistency. And I'll give an honourable mention to Minka Kelly, who plays the bloodthirsty right-hand woman of Marcus called North. The reason why is because she was in a TV show in 2014 called Almost Human, where a hard-boiled detective, played by Carl Urban, teams up with an android to solve crimes. Are you seeing a resemblance here? I'm not saying that Cage was cribbing, but the similarities between this show and the development of his hot new game, which was being made at the same time I might add, are uncanny. And after the 4th episode, for me, I was losing interest. But I find it odd that the story beats in the show coincidentally end up in Detroit. I'm not insinuating anything, but yeah, it's a bit greasy here, let's be honest. Once Marcus takes over Jericho, you are given the choice to peacefully protest for droid rights, or push this agenda by violence. Yup, at first I sighed at playing another game with a binary morality system, where you choose either sunshine and flowers, or be a baby-eating maniac. Actually, in a refreshing break from the norm, your choices from this point onward do have weight in this world. Sure, the people who are affected by Mark's decisions are not critical to the story, and most of the effect of this world is told to you rather than shown. I will give Cage credit for having a diverse platter of choices, and these choices, unlike the other games in the Cageography, are now easy to track by the use of, quite boringly, flowcharts, which did prompt me to play the game multiple times. Granted, most of these choices are not worth commenting on, but they added just enough interesting ideas to be worth going back and playing. That is why I couldn't say earlier that the story is crap, because these side stories are the most interesting part of the game. And yes, another tangent is approaching, and I'm not sorry. Later on in Connor and Hank's investigation, our detectives are called to attend another murder, this time at a brothel. It seems that our cadaver was getting a bit too rough with one of the working girls, which leads to our detectives searching for this killer. It turns out that this android is in love with another android, and they were fed up with being abused by these creeps and decided to run away. After a fight scene with our protagonists, and losing my lunch due to the motion sickness brought on by the shaky cam, Connor corners the couple, and then you have the choice to spare them or shoot the perp, causing the other one to break down. And once again, in isolation, this is a great one-shot idea of an android couple stuck in a horrible existence who want to be free. And the conundrum of what is morally right or wrong is set in this grey area, where no matter the intentions of these characters, they all have metaphorical blood on their hands. Okay, it's still that patented misery porn that Cage seems to have a burning desire to express at any given moment, but in this instance, it's at least interesting and tonally matching. And it goes beyond this absolute surface level that we have been spoon-fed throughout the entire game. Also, I can't hear the sounds of enthusiastic faps, while a real emotional moment graces us with its presence. Or it's a sound I've heard so often by now, it's become white noise, I'm not sure anymore. Which sadly can't be said when it comes to the gameplay, which, let's be honest here, hasn't changed in nearly a decade. And yes, I have mentioned this before, that the gameplay is as complex as pushing a play button on a media player's remote control. I think it's now appropriate to really go in on the gameplay itself and talk about the link between this and the visual and audio feedback. To give the gameplay some praise, Detroit and the other examples of this style are an evolution of the classic adventure game formula. While this evolution doesn't suffer from the infamous moon logic puzzle difficulty the genre is known for, you can see a direct link to what Quantic Dream are doing now and what was done, say, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Where this gameplay differs is the emphasis of pushing a random selection of controller inputs to progress this said story, and is the bare minimum in terms of intrinsic feedback. You could also say that this approach to the gameplay is an attempt to slide these interactive films into the DMs of a medium that's over 40 years old. That medium, of course, is video games, which is apparently still in its infancy in terms of telling meaningful emotional stories. While I personally disagree with that statement, let's run with it here. Something that did surprise me while making these reviews was the sheer number of people admitting that these games did affect them in an emotional level, especially in their teenage years. And now with the hindsight and the emotional normalization of adulthood, They see these games for what they really are, which leads me to assume that Cage made games over making films was because he knew that this hack approach wouldn't get him any traction in that medium. So, in a way, you could say that David Cage might be self-aware of his presence in the gaming space. Sure, like I said, I'm going to give him his flowers and say his team is a pioneer of this genre, but they are far from the best, and all it takes is for another studio to make a competent game in this style to make his entire back catalogue irrelevant. Arguably, that has already been done before and after his games came out. And these examples, flashing on the screen, were made by teams who use video games to their full potential while telling a mature story. So taking that all into account, this borderline meaningless control of your characters in Cage games are used as a crutch to lazily progress a story by giving us, the player, a half-rotten carrot on a stick to continue playing these games. Couple this with dizzying action scenes where the editor breaks the 180-degree rule of action of keeping everyone in frame so it's easy to track what's going on, which is ironic because their first interactive drama, Fahrenheit, actually did this really well, leads to the most important part of a video game, the gameplay, to be a passive endeavour. So now I've shit on that, let's talk about the story again. And I know I keep making this joke, but hey, it's the best joke we've got right now, apart from the game, obviously. Detroit Become Human, from a narrative perspective, is a perfect example of the journey being far more entertaining than the destination. And while this journey flies off into multiple tangents, both good and bad, at least stuff happens with a purpose, no matter how insignificant. For my multiple playthroughs of Detroit, I decided to do a single run of going down both the main paths, and then a few playthroughs where I did a mix-up between the peaceful and violent choices. Your choices will also influence the mood of Mark's collaborators. If you choose Force, you acquire the love of North, who comes off as a psychopath at worst and a psychopath at best, and Josh, who loves it when you use a velvet glove approach, but all he really does is whine and complain, or sound like he's whining even when he isn't. To cut to the chase, Josh sucks. Well, if we're being brutal, both of them are redundant. These moral anchors for Marcus to tie himself to are like pouring a glass of water into another glass of water, which is also my opinion of the choices that you make that are not binary. So I think it's best if we change gears and talk about the social political commentary inside Detroit Become Human. And yes, those sarcasm quotes are working overtime today. I can give Cage a tiny crumb of credit for trying to tackle a real world subject. The problem here is the last person I would give the microphone to say some real shit about a topic that I can barely comprehend myself would be David Cage. And while Adam Williams and David Cage try to detach the baggage of real life oppression of people of colour by commenting on the themes rather than the racism, is a form of pseudo-intellectualism. This blatant attempt to strip away the metaphor in a story where a race of androids is being treated with utter disdain is a logical leap that is taller than the ivory tower the creator of this said story inhabits. And I know I'm blending fiction with reality here, but this idealism, or whatever David Cage is trying to imply, is poorly thought out, and the stupidity on display is mesmerizing. When Marcus chooses to rise up and rally his android comrades, you have the ability to choose an icon to represent this new movement, and one in particular made my jaw drop. Yeah. Now, back when this game was being developed, and during its release, the Black Lives Matter movement was in remission. So, while it's still co-opting a logo of a real social movement, and that is still gross, I can see why they wanted to use this logo, and through the filter of verisimilitude, it makes sense in a way. The clenched fist is a symbol of defiance, of taking the power back for the people, and its symbolic resonance transcends any type of copyright or bureaucratic bullshit. The predicament of using this iconography puts David Cage and of course Quantic Dream on a knife edge in terms of telling a bespoke story stripped of any sort of metaphorical real life context and blurring this line between exploiting what is going on in the real world and commenting on this made up version of the real world.
What's my biggest pet peeve? Vagueness. Takes just as much time to be specific.
And this purity through ignorance, to take these themes and lazily drop them into the story, is instantly shattered when we still have incidents of police brutality, which in turn skyrockets a once floundering civil rights movement into public consciousness once again. The way the writers handled this whole theming of Detroit Become Human could be contributed to dancing too close to the fire. And once again, I'm not here to say that you cannot talk about very touchy subjects, but there is a way of handling these types of subjects. Like when I play Silent Hill 2, I'm not thinking about sunshine and roses. I am allowing myself to experience some pretty grim shit. In fact, some of my favourite experiences while playing video games is those stories where the punchline isn't where everything blows up or dies. Not saying that chainsawing aliens' heads off is not fun, because it very much is, but when I'm in the mood I like to be pushed in terms of my own moral compass. Especially when you've been playing games for so long, such as myself, where I want to be pushed out of my comfort zone. And back on subject, the rejection of metaphor and the use of civilly charged iconography is a poor attempt to comment on something that the writers have no idea what they are talking about. And this performative wokeness makes a mockery of the people who fight these injustices and panders to people who think they are fighting the good fight, yet all they are doing is just for show. Remember Coney 2012? How many millions of people put their little banners up with the Coney 2012 thing on their social media pages? How many rallied on these said social media pages to protest against Coney to then not show up? And that's how David Cage and Quantic Dream's message when it comes to the oppression of this race of androids comes across. It's performative and ultimately means nothing. And ironically, what they should have done is gone all in and made those provocative takes, rather than lowballers with this meaningless pap. At least then we would know where DC and his team were going with this, rather than this insidious wishy-washy stance. If they love making big and bold statements in their action and visuals, why can't they do that in their story? Plus I can't shake off this feeling of this underlying greasy sleaze covering everything. It just feels cynical. If David Cage wants to be taken seriously in his mission of creating mature stories for an assumed mature audience, he has proven himself again and again and again that he cannot do it. And this posturing of being this galaxy brain creative genius and this profound storyteller is a complete fabrication. And the ego to say that he wants to change the game in interactive storytelling while producing low-rent shit like this makes him look like a dissociated schlub. And I know it's very easy to start calling him names and stuff like that, and I've done it a little bit throughout the series, but his lack of forward momentum in his statements makes him just look like a coward. However, I think it's the best time to step back and keep my own flawed perspective in check. You see, this mindset of analysing the messages of these stories that apparently have not been related to real life events might be excessive to the people who aren't aware of the real events that the creators clearly adapted to meet their own needs, or for people who don't care for the subtleties. And I bet that blue pill tastes so sweet. To remind everyone, the reason why this series of videos mutated from this casual riffing to these in-depth discussions is due to how David Cage and his conspirators use Olympic levels of mental gymnastics to say a lot without saying anything. Yes, I am aware I have already mentioned this before, but for this part of the video, it needs reiterating. If you stand for nothing, or your intent is unclear, then all you are doing in anything in life is wasting people's time. And I'm not saying that everything needs to have a message. When I play, say, Postal 2, I'm not thinking about the implication of my mindless slaughter, or the flagrant disregard for political correctness, because I am too occupied laughing like an idiot because the sandbox I am given allows me to express myself in any way I want. In a way, I am creating my own narrative. And while it may be crass, it is far more satisfying than this meticulously crafted, rigid cinematic experience. Furthermore, if we just accept what David Cage is trying to express at this face value, we are then allowing people who create this crap to do this again and again. When you buy this type of game, it just allows this type of quality to thrive. In the same vein as modern military shooters in the last decade and a half. If people stopped buying them, they would stop making them. So then when people complain about there's too many Call of Duty games, such as myself, and I buy a Call of Duty game, I've got no one else to blame but myself. And to quote Dan Olsen from the channel Folding Ideas,
"This is how you get Jarhead sequels. Do you want Jarhead sequels? Because this is how you get Jarhead sequels."
Love being a Marine. Hoorah!
I just want to tidy up your room a little. I only need 2 minutes. Is that okay, Alice? Alice in Wonderland. Of course.
oh shit, I forgot about Alice. If you remember that I alluded to something about Kara and Alice early on in this video, well, throughout this journey, the big bastard who joins you on this pilgrimage to Canada, who is called Luther, attempts to tell Kara a secret about Alice that she doesn't want to know.
Kara, have you ever noticed anything about Alice? Kara, there's something I need to tell you. It's about Alice.
Not now, Luther.
Kara, there's something I have to tell you. It's about Alice.
We'll have lots of time to talk on the bus. I'll be back. Stay with Alice.
And this secret recontextualizes the entire relationship between Kara and Alice, and is apparently a big moment in the story. I'm just going to show you how this reveal happens.
Alice?
You knew from the beginning. You just didn't want to see it. She wanted a mom, and you wanted someone to care for. You needed each other. What difference does it make? Do you love her any less now that you know she's one of us? Alice loves you, Kara. She loves you more than anything in the world. She became the little girl you wanted, and you became the mother she needed. Forgetting who you are to become what someone needs you to be. Maybe that's what it means to be alive.
Now, question time. Are you moved by this, apart from laughing at it, by how awkward it is? This big reveal that Cage planted seeds throughout, this big character development, and all the stuff that happens before and after this reveal raises more questions than it answers. Such as, if Alice and Kara are both androids, and there is more than one that looks like them, how, as the player, haven't we seen more of these throughout the story? You would think that Kara would have bumped into a few of her twin sisters, right? Or seen more Alice's just lollygagging around. Also, this reveal changes the impact of the implied abuse that Alice had to endure from her piece of shit dad, and is easily the dumbest contradiction I have seen in a David Cage game.
Life's funny. I lost my job because of androids. Then when I need somebody to take care of this goddamn house, what do? I go out and hire a fucking android. What a joke. Of course, androids are so fucking wonderful. They never fail. They're never tired. Never sad. They're so fucking perfect, they ruin my fucking life!
How can Todd complain about androids ruining his life when he should know that his own daughter is one? Was he that high out of his fucking mind not to notice? As we're at the stage of the video where I'm picking holes in the logic of a David Cage game, let's have some more fun. Another rapturous plot hole is where Marcus in a certain playthrough can acquire a bomb that will wipe out the entire city if their demands are not met. And yes, this has been used as a tactic in real life political coups, but in this game it dilutes the message, especially when the threat is everyone being turned into nuclear vapor. And the best part of this whole arc is that this explosion is told to you rather than shown. Also, there's another tidbit I'd like to mention which was very amusing in my eyes, where Connor can die throughout the story, but as he's an android and they've got thousands of copies of Connor, when he's rebuilt, Hank just freaks out every single time, and it's one of the best running gags in the game.
Jesus Christ.
My predecessor was unfortunately destroyed, but CyberLife transferred its memory and sent me to replace it.
You died in my arms. And now you're back here as if nothing happened. Fuck you.
And the last one I like to highlight is when Connor turns his back on the police and turns into John Wick. It's not specifically a plot hole, but it comes out of nowhere and I want more because it's fucking great. And that's not scratching the surface on how all three of our characters finally meet. Well, two of the said characters, because Kara's encounter with Marcus is so small it's meaningless. But after this moment, she acts like she met her god. She keeps making offhand comments about Marcus and stuff he did, even though they must have known each other for about 5 minutes. It's weird. And it's another obvious example of Kara being on the Z team in terms of the story. I could easily blow raspberries for the rest of this video, and it would be more meaningful than what she does throughout the whole story. And going back on the civil rights thing for just a little moment here, the cherry on top of this whole shit sundae is Kara's chat with a woman called Rose, who is a human helping androids escape the city to the Great White North. The problem is, you know what, I'm telling too much, just watch.
What are deviants doing in the snow with a little girl?
Her father was beating her. When I saw what was happening, something snapped inside of me. All of a sudden, I felt like her life was more important than mine. I had to protect her. So we ran away.
I understand.
Why are you helping us? Most humans hate androids.
My people were often made to feel their lives were worthless. Some survived, but only because they found others who helped them along the way.
Okay, on a surface level, this sounds like a profound moment, and I'm not going to take away the actors here, the performances are fantastic. But having a black woman explain what is going on is like, well, that underlying grease is bubbling through the cracks again, and it's, I feel like I need to take a shower. And it's David Cage having his provocative cake and trying to eat it. But once again, he has no subtlety, so this just comes off as just And this sums up my overall feelings towards the multiple endings too. and while most of it follows the same shades of grey that the rest of the story has, and is honestly pretty damn compelling, most of them are so dull it makes playing through the game almost meaningless. Like I said, Detroit, despite its flaws, is a decent journey with a lousy destination. And no, this isn't a joke on the expense of the Canucks.
A fucking leaf.
And call me twisted, I preferred the bad endings over the good ones because, alright, okay, all the endings left me with more questions than answers again, but for the sake of your attention span, I'm going to keep this part of the video tight and compact. Imprisoned, if you will. Oh man, that's a bad joke. One finale I want to talk about is when Kara gets captured and gets sent to what can only be described as an android concentration camp. Okay, it's called a recycling center, but yeah, big yikes. In this said camp, Kara is stripped of her identity and forced into a meat grinder, or a metal grinder, whatever. And if you let this thing play out, it's pretty fucking dark. But I will give Quantic their due again, because even when you think this ending is going to be one destination, no. All these endings have multiple variables, and even when it looks like it's going to be the end for Kara, it isn't. You can escape the camp and live as a fugitive, and most of these endings have that same sort of layer of change. You can just go the complete opposite, and that's a really cool idea. And yes, I won't deny that if you let this ending play out, it's pretty grim, but it's one of the few times where Detroit has any kind of eternal logic in its world. Until, and here comes the plot holes again, you realise that all these androids come from a single company, and this said company didn't make a kill switch to shut these things down if they got out of hand. You know, a power switch that is separate from their AI runtimes. Like, imagine that. You could have an ending of the game where all the androids drop dead when they shut off a central server. What I'm trying to say is, where's my Dark Age of Camelot ending, David Cage? While there's a broad variety of endings and it's the only excess apart from the graphics that actually makes sense to me, the ones I've experienced in my 5 playthroughs of Detroit Become Human and the ones I've watched in various compilations on YouTube all have this underbaked notion to them, and none of them left me wanting more. Just like Heavy Rain, just like Beyond, Detroit falls into the miasma of being a story that is stuffed full of interesting ideas, but none of them have any long-term payoff apart from their main threads, which, as you already know, are the Michael Bay explosions everywhere style shit. Sure, it's fun at first glance, and I won't lie, I had a blast in my first playthrough, but as there's so much white noise contained in Detroit Become Human, trying to recall what happened even minutes after the fact was a challenge. Actually, that was the biggest problem while making these videos. The amount of content that is thrown into your lap on a narrative level is almost suffocating. Even with my extensive notes and multiple terabytes of recorded game footage, I struggled to remember what happened during this story, with its overwhelming amount of concepts stuffed into a narrative that was already flush with multiple strands in the main plot, and these strands on their own would have been passable. If DC could just trim back on these ideas and bank them for future games, or make his games into an episodic format as I theorised earlier, maybe we might have a chance to make the smaller ideas pop out and make an impression. Because in this format, everything has been beaten down into this fine, bland paste. Taking Detroit as a whole is a pill that is borderline impossible to swallow, and it's another promising game sacrificed on the altar of feature creep and narrative bloat. And the statements inside may sound profound and deep, yet have nothing other to say except the words that fall out of their lips. In the end, all those moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain. And that sums up my thoughts on Detroit. It's a deeply flawed game with a ton of upside that almost collapses under its own narrative weight, and it's dumb as hell. With that said, it's far more interesting and entertaining than Quantic's previous games. Yet it shares the same baggage as those previous titles, and while I don't care for David Cage and his supernatural incompetence with writing, his directorial work on the other hand is okay. His team knows how to make a stunning looking game, and there are shots and sequences that really stood out to me. It just hammers this point home. If we could put this technology in the right hands, we could see some cool cinematic moments that we have never seen before in gaming. And it just irks me that we have people here with all the gear but no idea. And I do get the impression that David Cage writes like he's in a permanent midlife crisis. And if I had a takeaway from all this stuff, is that I think I'm done with auteurs in any media. Yeah, I will celebrate individual expression. I mean, I make YouTube videos here. Would be awkward if I said the opposite. As it comes to the media I consume, a singular creator will never take precedent over a group. Sure, I will still play games from these said creators, but now they won't hold any extra meaning for me. To put it bluntly, fuck 'em. The bottom line here is Detroit Become Human is an onion of idiocy. While it may lead you to a tear, it has a higher chance to leave a bitter taste in your mouth. I can softly recommend it, but it's only for the people who have a high tolerance for jank, or have too many brain cells that they want to burn. And now that my job is done, yes, I know Omricon is another DC game and I'll get to it eventually, I am happy to say that I'm done with David Cage and his dramatic detritus.
Androids, everybody needs good androids. Androids should be...
We wanted to explore universal themes, Pet. Themes that have repeated themselves throughout societies, and one of those is the relationship between those who have power and those who do not have power.
Androids have feelings. Androids have feelings. Androids have feelings too.
Oh man, it's so good to be playing normal games again. Oh, I'm so glad. It's been such a long road, and I never want to play a David Cage game again. Ah, this is nice. I'm bored.
You'll pay for this. How much will you steal from me before you're satisfied?